Hi, my name is Cailey and I'm a librarian here at Mentor Public Library.
And I'm Meg, also a librarian, and welcome to this week's edition of All Booked Up with Cailey and Meg, where each week we've been giving you different book recommendations related to a different theme. This week's theme is going to be adult fantasy books. So if you need an escape at this time, come join us and we'll show you some different worlds in these great new books.
Yes, and if you have not yet filled in the square on our summer reading bingo sheet for fantasy, now is the time to do it. The summer reading bingo sheets are due at the end of July. You can turn them in at any of our Mentor Public Library locations. And if you haven't downloaded one, do it now. It's at mentorpl.org/summerreading2020.
Yes, absolutely. And just a quick reminder before we begin, all of these books that we're mentioning today are going to be available through either our Libby or Hoopla digital apps, where you can read them on your phone or tablet or your computer, or you can get a physical copy here at the library. All right, so Cailey, what's your first book?
So my first book is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. It's a super cute fantasy book. And it starts off with Linus, who is a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth. And he is a model employee and does exactly what they ask of him, nothing more, nothing less. But he follows the rules to a T and always has. He leads a pretty boring life, lives alone except for his cranky cat, and he likes it that way. That's what he's used to. But one day he's summoned by the extremely upper management and sent on a top secret assignment to investigate the Mary Sauce orphanage. And remember, he works with the magical youth all the time, but the magical youth at this orphanage are dangerously magical. They are children who have powers that could potentially bring about the end of days. And Linus is charged with investigating this orphanage and seeing the danger levels. So he goes to visit this orphanage, and when he arrives, he meets not just these magical children, but also their caretaker, Arthur Parnassus, who is fiercely protective of the children he's caring for. He knows that they're all special, and even though he knows as well that their powers are a little bit dangerous, he also knows that they're just children. And Linus discovers that there's more than meets the eye here, and even though he does see the dangers that they pose, he now has to discover a way to balance what he also knows of these kids who have sort of wormed their way into his heart. And his world has up till now been very black and white, but he has to try and see the gray, basically, the in-between.
Yeah, it's giving me like vibes of Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, but maybe for adults. So that's kind of cool, and I really like that book. So that sounds like a good one. My next one is by an author, pretty big name author, Veronica Roth.
Yes, I might have heard of her.
Maybe, just maybe. If you don't know her, she's more famous for her YA books for teens, especially the Divergent series, which have actually been made into movies. So she's a big bestseller author, but now she's tried adult books. So this is her very first book intended for an adult audience, and it's called Chosen Ones. So it's still in the fantasy genre. This book takes place in an alternate timeline Chicago. So there's a couple things different about it. It's still urban, but there's this menacing force over the city called the Dark One. And he kind of has been terrorizing all of North America with this mysterious power that kind of levels the entire city and causes complete mayhem. So what happens when he is ruining all these towns across the country is that these 5 teenagers called the Chosen Ones are chosen and gifted these magical powers to try and defeat the Dark One. And they actually succeed. So at the beginning of the book, like, they become world famous for like saving the world, defeating the Dark One, and all of this. Fast forward at the beginning of the book, 15 years later, the world's kind of moved on and kind of forgotten about these 5 people, but these people are now in their early 30s. They're kind of stuck. They have these magical powers and they risk their lives, but now no one really thinks about them anymore. And they're the ones who are kind of struggling to cope now. So it particularly focuses on this one particular member of the Chosen Ones named Sloane, who kind of knows a little bit more about the Dark One than any of the other ones did. So she has almost like these PTSD moments where she's like haunted by the past and things like that. And she also has a little bit of an attitude problem because it's her interactions with some of the other members of the Chosen Ones. But so that's her. It follows Sloane until one day, one of the 5 members dies. And so all of the other 4 members reunite at the funeral of this other member. And when they meet at this funeral, they find out that the Dark One, maybe they didn't completely defeat him like they thought they did. So he kind of has some plans that they had no idea about. So some of these secrets come out and they kind of have to realize, how long is this battle that we're fighting? How long do we have to fight it? So I just think it's a really interesting take on like the Chosen One idea in fantasy. And Veronica Roth specifically said, it isn't a book about coming of age. It's about maturing, taking responsibility for your place in the world, and realizing that pain doesn't give you a license to be a jerk. So those are very adulty themes. Wouldn't you say, Cailey? Not for we all need to learn how to do this, right?
Yes.
But yeah, so that is hopefully a good one to start with.
That makes me think a little bit of Stephen King's It, because the kids think they defeated it, and then years later as adults.
Yeah.
But also, didn't Divergent take place in Chicago as well, like an alternate Chicago?
So yeah, so
I think Veronica Roth likes Chicago.
Yeah.
The next book that I have is called The Book of M by Peng Shepherd. It came out a couple years ago. And I love a good futuristic tale, sort of, the dystopian futures. This book starts off one day in India and a man loses his shadow. Oh. And that makes me think of Peter Pan. But yeah, a man loses his shadow. And at first this is concerning and weird, but not immediately scary, but soon it starts happening throughout the entire world. And it turns out that the loss of the shadow is foreshadowing.
Oh,
bad pun. Is foreshadowing the loss of memory. And so people who have lost their shadows soon begin to lose their memories. And while that is terrible in and of itself, there's a magical element to this too, in that the memories that they lose affect the real world. So if they forget a person, a place, a thing, it can affect that person, place, or thing to the point of completely disappearing.
Like Coco.
Yes, like Coco. And so it's creepy, and it's a terrible, dangerous world now. And it naturally, when something crazy is happening, violence all over the place, and it has become a scary place. And there's a couple, Ori and Max, who are 2 of the 4 narrators in this book, who are trying to deal with this. And Ori still has his shadow, but his wife Max has lost hers. And the 2 of them are working together very early on to try to keep her memories as long as possible. And he wants to keep her with him as long as possible. But Max is very worried about what will happen if she forgets Ori. And so she is worried about what's going to happen to him and runs away. And she's trying to remember all along, all the things along, but she's alone now. And Ori will not take that sitting down, and he is going to find his wife. So he goes off to try and find her in this dangerous world of people who have lost their shadows. And on top of this, there are 2 other narrators with different storylines that kind of interweave in a very creative way. And it's not super apparent how everyone is connected right at first, but rumors start to fly about New Orleans being the place that people will find answers about what is going on with the people who are losing their shadows and their memories. And so everyone kind of converges on this city to try and figure out what's going on. And it's got that creepy futuristic stuff, but it's all, and like almost like a weird virus kind of story, but also has some magical elements woven in there, and you don't know why or how this whole thing started.
Right. And you know what? The Ori and Max plotline makes me think, like, if Nicholas Sparks ever decided to do fantasy, he would do something like that, where like the amnesia, I'm going to save you from your, it just,
you're going to start writing letters to him.
Please, Nicholas Sparks, write that as your next fantasy book. But yeah, anyway. So my last one is a little bit different, still fantasy, but maybe more Gothic magical realism fantasy. So it's kind of different. It's called Mexican Gothic is the name of the book, by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. So this one is about a young woman named Noemi Taboda, if I said that right. And she is this kind of debutante, young woman, kind of living, her life, should be going to cocktail parties, living kind of ritzy. But then she gets this letter from her cousin in Mexico, which is kind of ominous. She gets this ominous letter, like her cousin is having these visions of doom, like she's like paranoid about being destroyed and like taken away. And so Noemi's very concerned. So she goes down to the Mexican estate where her cousin lives, called High Place. And her cousin actually is a newlywed. Her cousin just got married. So she goes to visit her cousin and her cousin's new husband. And it's just this High Place estate. This place has a lot of secrets, and it turns out to be kind of a creepy place that maybe like one of those where like the house has its kind of its own life, its own kind of strange things start happening. Her cousin's husband kind of is a mixture of alluring but kind of creepy at the same time. And then the cousin's husband's dad is there too, and he's also creepy, I guess. So there's a lot of like strange characters. And then Noemi, once she starts staying there, she has these dreams as well, kind of like her cousin. And in these dreams, there's like this foreboding, and it's like the house is speaking to her, and these kind of magical elements, like what's going on at this house. So the only friend that she really seems to have, Noemi, is this little boy, actually the husband's younger brother. He's a little boy, and he befriends her, but she thinks he actually has some of the biggest secrets of them all. So it's very interesting. If you're kind of a fan of horror as well, I'd say, and magical, elements as well, I think it kind of has a little bit of that for everybody. And also, Noemi was my assigned name in high school when I took French, so I just think that's a cool character.
Yeah, it's got kind of that Gothic feel to it, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Sort of like a haunted house sort of vibe too.
Oh, yeah, right. Very cool.
Well, that is all we have for this week. We will be back next week talking about teen road trip books, which should be fun. And I think that's all we've got.
Yeah, so absolutely. So happy reading. Have a good day.